I still remember the day I met her as if it happened just yesterday. It was one of those rare moments when you meet someone and feel as if time stops, and for a brief second, the world around you ceases to exist. Her name was Isolde, and from the first glance, I knew my life was about to change forever. I, Elias Storm, had always been a man of routine, quiet, reserved, and deeply focused on my work. I had never been one to chase after love, never believed in fairy tales. But then Isolde entered my life, and everything I knew about myself, about love, was turned upside down. She was captivating. Not just in the way she looked, though that alone could have rendered any man speechless, but in the way she spoke, the way she moved, the way she made the mundane seem magical. It was as if she had an aura that drew people to her, and without even trying, she made me feel like the most important person in the world. We met at a charity event, an event I wasn't particularly excited about attending. But fate, or maybe a twist of destiny, had other plans for me that night. She was standing by the window, her profile bathed in the soft glow of the city lights outside. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and in that instant, something unexplainable passed between us. "Hi," I said, my voice suddenly sounding foreign to me, as if I'd lost my grasp on normal conversation. She smiled. "Hi, Elias. I've heard a lot about you." Her voice was soft, yet confident, like the calm before a storm. We talked for hours that night. The conversation flowed effortlessly. She was smart, witty, and had a mysterious air about her that kept me hooked. She didn't ask the usual questions people ask when they want to get to know someone. Instead, she seemed to see straight through me, as if she could peer into the very heart of who I was. It was both unsettling and strangely comforting. By the end of the evening, I knew I wanted to see her again, but I also knew I'd never be the same. The connection between us was undeniable, something that ran deeper than just attraction. It felt as though we were meant to cross paths. That our destinies were intertwined in a way I couldn't yet understand. A few days later, she called. "I was hoping we could have dinner sometime." "Just the two of us," she said. Her voice was soft, almost teasing, as though she knew how much I wanted to hear those words. I didn't hesitate. "I'd love that." And just like that, we made plans to meet. Over the following weeks, we spent more and more time together. Every date, every conversation, every shared laugh made me fall deeper into her world. Isolde wasn't just a woman, she was a mystery, and I was captivated by it. She had this way of making me feel like the most important person in her life, like I was the one who made her world shine brighter. For the first time in my life, I felt alive in a way I hadn't known was possible. I gave her my heart without hesitation, without even questioning it. She was my everything. Every morning, I woke up with the thought of her in my mind, and every night, I drifted to sleep with dreams of our future together. She often spoke of dreams and ambitions. Of how she wanted to build something grand, something meaningful. Her words were filled with passion, and I believed in them. She painted a picture of our life together, one that was full of promise, adventure, and love. She made me believe that true love was something you could hold in your hands, something you could touch, feel, and cherish forever. One evening, after a wonderful dinner, we walked through the park, the cool evening air swirling around us. As we reached the bench by the lake, she stopped and turned to face me. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I want you to know that I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me feel like I can be myself, like I can finally be whole." I smiled, my heart swelling with affection. "Isolde, I feel the same way. I don't know how, but you've become everything to me." She leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a soft, lingering kiss. In that moment, I felt like I had everything I'd ever wanted, a perfect woman, a perfect love, a perfect life ahead of us. We were perfect together, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. Little did I know, that in the near future, the perfect world we had built together would begin to crumble. I would soon realize that everything I thought I knew about Isolde, about love, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. But for now, in this moment, I believed in us. I believed in her. And I believed that nothing could ever break what we had. Thus began the dream of my life. A love so beautiful, so complete, that nothing else seemed to matter. But in the days that followed, the cracks in this picture-perfect world would start to show, and the dream would slowly turn into a nightmare I never saw coming. And so, my story began. The story of how a man's heart could be shattered by the very one he trusted the most. As the days passed, I noticed small changes in Isolde. At first, I chalked it up to her busy schedule. She was a woman with big dreams, and I admired her for it. But there was something different. A distance that hadn't been there before. I remember one evening clearly. We were having dinner at a cozy restaurant, the kind where the atmosphere is so intimate that you can't help but feel you're the only two people in the world. Yet, despite the charm of the place, something felt off. Isolde was quieter than usual, her gaze distant as she poked at her food, lost in thought. I tried to spark a conversation, asking her about her day, her thoughts, anything. But she just smiled faintly, nodding, offering vague answers. Busy, she said, you know how it is. She changed the subject quickly, as if she were trying to avoid something. But I couldn't shake the feeling. She was slipping away, even though she hadn't physically gone anywhere. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual, replaying every moment in my mind, trying to figure out what had changed. Had I done something wrong? Did she feel differently about me? I tried to push it aside, telling myself that perhaps I was overthinking. Isolde wasn't one for drama. She wasn't the type to play games or be misleading. But in the pit of my stomach, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. I was starting to wonder if I could truly trust her the way I had once believed. A few days later, I caught her in a moment of strange behavior. We had planned to meet for lunch, but when I arrived at her apartment, I found her phone screen flashing with an incoming message. She wasn't in the room at the time, but I had to admit. I couldn't resist. I glanced at the phone. The message was from a name I didn't recognize, Liam. My heart skipped a beat. I'd never heard her mention a Liam before. I quickly looked away, a sense of guilt washing over me. Was I really about to invade her privacy? No. I had to trust her. But my mind was already racing. When Isolde came back into the room, I couldn't help myself. I had to ask. Who's Liam? I tried to sound casual, as if the question hadn't been nagging at me for the last few minutes. She froze. The moment stretched on for too long, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite place. Liam is just a colleague, she said, her tone too dismissive, too rehearsed. I told you about him before. But I couldn't recall any mention of him. Was I being paranoid? I didn't know. But something in her voice didn't sit right with me. I smiled, though the smile felt forced. Right. I must have forgotten. As the weeks went by, more things began to feel off. Little things at first. She was spending more time at work, more time on her phone, always rushing out when she had plans with me. The distance between us grew. At night, she would curl up on her side of the bed, lost in her thoughts, barely acknowledging me. It was like I was no longer the most important part of her life. And then there were the phone calls, the ones I couldn't ignore. I'd hear her in the other room, speaking in hushed tones, laughing a little too freely, her voice bright and flirtatious. Each time she hung up, she would quickly silence her phone, giving me an apologetic look as though she were trying to act normal. Work, she'd say with a half smile. A lot of pressure lately. But I knew better. I wasn't stupid. I knew when someone was lying to me. One evening, I decided I could no longer sit back and ignore my suspicions. I followed her. It wasn't something I was proud of, but the doubts had eaten away at me for too long. I waited until she slipped out for what I assumed was yet another late-night meeting, and quietly got into my car. I kept my distance, watching her as she walked towards a sleek black car parked a few blocks away. And then I saw it. She greeted someone, a man, with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. I watched them hug. The hug wasn't a friendly one. It was tight, lingering, as if there was something more between them than mere camaraderie. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing. I watched as they got into the car together and drove off, and that was when I knew, I wasn't imagining things. There was something going on, something I hadn't been a part of. I sat there for what felt like hours, the world around me a blur. The love I thought we shared, the trust one had built up with Isolde, it was all coming undone, one secret at a time. When I returned home, I was numb. I felt like a stranger in my own life, unsure of who I could trust anymore. I tried to act normal when Isolde returned, but everything felt different. My gaze lingered on her longer than usual, scrutinizing her every move, every word. She must have known something had changed. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, but then she looked away, almost too quickly. I had to know the truth. And I knew that soon, I would have to confront her. But for now, I just sat in silence, drowning in my thoughts. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. And it broke me. The cracks were showing. And the love I thought was unbreakable was starting to crumble. The following days were a blur. I could barely focus on anything except the unsettling images that haunted my mind, Isolde with that man, laughing, sharing a moment I wasn't part of. My heart ached as I replayed it over and over, each time feeling more like a betrayal. I had always trusted her completely, but now, the very foundation of that trust felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand. The nights were the hardest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, the intimacy in their embrace, the way her eyes lit up when he spoke. And I couldn't help but ask myself, why? But the truth gnawed me, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to confront her. I had to face whatever was lurking in the dark corners of our relationship. So, when she came home that evening, I decided it was time. She walked in, her usual smile plastered on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. I knew then that she was hiding something, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Isolde, I began, my voice tight with restraint. We need to talk. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. She recovered quickly, though, and nodded. Of course, Elias. What's on your mind? I couldn't keep my emotions bottled up any longer. I had to ask the questions that had been eating away at me. Who's Liam? The words slipped out, sharp and accusing. Her eyes widened in surprise, but only for a moment. Then she looked away, her lips pressing together into a thin line. Liam's just a colleague, she said, her tone too calm, too rehearsed. It was the same line she had used before. I didn't buy it. I could feel the walls she was putting up, and my frustration began to boil over. I saw you with him. You hugged him. Is that what colleagues do? Hug each other like that? She flinched, and for the briefest moment, I saw guilt flash across her face, before she quickly masked it. Elias, it's not what you think. You're overreacting. My heart pounded as I pressed on, unable to contain my hurt. Overreacting? I followed you. I saw the way you two looked at each other. Don't lie to me, Isolde. Don't lie about us. About me. There was a silence that stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Her hands trembled as she folded them together, and for the first time, I saw her guard slip. I'm not lying, she said softly, her voice now carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. But maybe I haven't been honest with you. Not about everything. The confession hung in the air like a heavy fog. My breath caught in my chest. What does that mean? I thought, my mind racing. What was she hiding? I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to hurt you, she continued, her eyes averted, like she couldn't bring herself to face me. Liam, he's someone from my past. Someone I've been seeing, for a while now. My blood ran cold. The room seemed to spin, the walls closing in on me. She's been seeing him. The words felt like a punch to the gut, leaving me gasping for air. I tried to steady myself, but the pain was unbearable. You've been seeing him while you've been with me? I asked, the words thick with disbelief. I never meant for it to happen, she said, her voice shaking. It started before we met, and I was trying to end things, but... Elias, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I was trying to keep everything separate, but now it's all out of control. The weight of her confession hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt my world crumble around me. Everything I thought we had built, every promise, every laugh, every moment, was shattered in an instant. The person I had trusted more than anyone, the woman I had given my heart to, had been keeping a secret from me this entire time. And worse, she had betrayed me, not once, but over and over again. I took a step back, my chest tightening as I tried to process the words, the situation. I couldn't speak. What was there left to say? I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her voice breaking now. But I was scared, Elias. Scared of losing what I had with you, scared of the mess I was in with Liam. I didn't know how to tell you. How could you not tell me? My voice cracked, the hurt spilling through the cracks. How could you keep lying to me? How could you do this? Isolde reached out, her hand trembling as if she wanted to touch me, to comfort me. But I stepped back, unable to let her. The betrayal was too raw, too deep. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I care about you, Elias. I really do. But those words, I care about you, felt hollow now. They were just words, empty and meaningless in the face of everything she had hidden from me. I had given her my trust, my heart, and she had turned it into something I didn't even recognize. I looked at her, my eyes burning with a mixture of hurt, anger, and disbelief. I don't know who you are anymore, Isolde. I don't know who I am in this anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. The door closed softly behind me, but it felt like a chapter of my life had slammed shut with a force I couldn't comprehend. As I stood outside in the cold night air, I could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. Everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, had just been ripped apart. I had never expected this. I had never expected her to betray me, to lie to me, to choose someone else over what we had. The pain was suffocating. And the worst part? I still loved her. I still wanted to believe in us. But how could I? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure, the storm inside me wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days following our confrontation felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to go through the motions of my life, work, errands, meaningless conversations with friends, but nothing felt the same. Isolde was no longer the woman I had known. The warmth, the affection, the bond we had shared, it was all gone. The woman I loved had disappeared, replaced by someone I couldn't even recognize. I moved through each day in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the lies, the betrayal. I replayed the moment when she had confessed everything, her relationship with Liam, her excuses, her promises that she cared for me, but none of it felt real anymore. How could she have kept this secret for so long? How could she look at me, tell me she loved me, and hide something like that? Every word she had ever said felt tainted now. There were moments, though, when I would find myself reaching for my phone, thinking of calling her, asking if we could talk, if we could somehow fix this. But then the reality would hit me again, the pain, the anger, and I would pull my hand back, disgusted with myself for even considering it. She had shattered my trust. And once trust is broken, it's impossible to put it back together. Isolde tried to reach out to me several times after that night. Texts, calls, even a few desperate voicemails asking me to meet her, to listen to her side of the story. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. The pain was too fresh, too raw. I didn't want to hear her explanations, her apologies. I didn't want any more lies. I wanted the truth, but the truth was too painful to face. It was one evening, a few weeks later, when I finally saw her again. I had been out at a bar with friends, trying to distract myself, trying to pretend that everything was fine. But the moment I stepped out into the cool night air, there she was. She was standing across the street, her face pale, her eyes searching through the crowd. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea how long she had been standing there, waiting for me to notice her. She looked different, tired, worn. Like the weight of what had happened was crushing her just as much as it had crushed me. She saw me then, and our eyes locked for the first time in weeks. There was a hesitation between us, a lingering uncertainty in the air. She took a step forward, her hand shaking slightly as she reached out. Elias. Her voice cracked, like she was trying to hold back tears. Please. I just need to talk to you. I didn't say anything. My body stiffened, my fists clenching at my sides. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. There was so much anger inside me, so much hurt. But there was also something else, something I hated even more than the pain. I still loved her. And that terrified me. I know you're angry, she continued, her voice softer now. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that what happened with Liam, it was a mistake. I never meant for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you. The words stung, but I couldn't let myself fall for them. Not again. Not after everything. You've already hurt me, Isolde. You've already broken everything. What we had, it was a lie. Her eyes filled with tears, and she stepped closer, almost as if she wanted to reach out and touch me, to make things right. But I couldn't let her. I couldn't let her undo the damage she had done. I had already been too weak, too trusting. I couldn't keep living in this lie. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I love you, Elias. I still love you. I don't know what happened, but I've regretted it every single day. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who had once made me feel whole, who had once been my everything. But then reality crashed back in. I couldn't forget what she had done. I couldn't forget the betrayal. I can't do this, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I can't forgive you. Not this time. Not after everything. She stood there, her face pale and tear-streaked, her body shaking with quiet sobs. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. I couldn't fix this. Not anymore. I turned away, my heart breaking with every step I took away from her. But I knew it was the right decision. I couldn't keep living in the past, in the lies. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving her behind. The days that followed were a blur of loneliness. I thought I had learned to live without her, but every day felt like a battle. I missed her, not just the woman she had been, but the idea of her, the hope I had carried for so long. I missed the way she made me feel alive, the way she made me believe in love. But now, all of that was gone. I kept thinking about Liam. Was he the one she had chosen? Was he the one who had made her feel something I couldn't? I hated that I couldn't get him out of my mind, even though I knew I had no right to be jealous. She had already chosen him. She had already betrayed me. It was in the quiet of the night that I finally allowed myself to feel everything, the anger, the hurt, the confusion. But most of all, the sorrow. I had loved her with all my heart, and she had torn it apart. And now, I had to learn to live without her. It had been months since that night. And I was still learning to let go. The pain never truly faded. It lingered in the background, in the silence of my apartment, in the moments when I least expected it. But I had made my peace with it. I had to. Isolde had moved on, as I knew she would. And so, in time, I would too. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Time moved forward, as it always does, whether we're ready for it or not. But I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be ready for anything again. My life, the one I had so carefully built with Isolde at my side, had fallen apart. And yet, somehow, I was still standing, still breathing, though each breath felt like a struggle. I threw myself into work, into distractions, into the dull routine of life, but nothing seemed to fill the void she had left behind. I thought that maybe, just maybe, with time, the pain would fade. But each day without her felt like a slow erosion of who I was. I didn't recognize the man I had become. The man who had loved so deeply, so blindly. The man who had been torn apart by betrayal. I tried dating again, hoping to find some semblance of what I had lost. But every woman I met only reminded me of Isolde. I would catch myself comparing them to her, measuring their smiles, their laughs, their mannerisms, to the woman I once loved. No one could ever measure up. And I knew, deep down, that I wasn't ready to love again. Not yet. Not after what I had been through. It wasn't just Isolde I missed. I missed us, the idea of us. The future I had imagined with her. I had envisioned a life together, travels, late-night talks, quiet mornings shared over coffee. A life where we faced the world together, hand in hand. But those dreams were shattered, as broken as the trust she had destroyed. It was late one evening, just as the sun was setting, that I got the message. I had been sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the TV, unable to focus on anything. I had just poured myself a drink when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. I had been avoiding her, avoiding any reminders of her existence. But something compelled me to check it. It was from Isolde. "Elias, I need to see you. Please. Can we talk one last time?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, to ignore her completely and move on for good. But there was another part of me, the part that still cared, the part that still felt something for her, that wanted to know what she had to say. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the reply button. What could she possibly say? What more could she offer? I took a deep breath, then typed back. "Where?" A few minutes later, she replied with a location. It was the same park where we had had our first date. The same place where I had kissed her under the stars, where we had promised to never let go. The memories hit me like a freight train, and I felt the weight of everything I had been through. But I knew I had to face her. For myself. When I arrived at the park, it was quiet. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I walked along the familiar path, my steps slow, my mind racing. And then I saw her. Isolde stood by the old oak tree where we had first met, her back to me, her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of everything was finally taking its toll. She hadn't changed much in the months we had been apart. Her hair was still the same, long, dark, and cascading over her shoulders. But there was a sadness in her eyes now that I had never seen before. When she turned and saw me, her face softened, and she stepped forward, though there was a hesitation in her movements. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, the silence between us thick and heavy. Isolde. I said her name, my voice hoarse, like I hadn't spoken it in years. She swallowed, her lips trembling as she looked at me. Elias, she whispered. I never meant for it to end like this. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt the anger start to bubble up again, but I quickly pushed it down. Then why did you? Why did you lie to me? Why did you make me believe something that wasn't true? I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I was scared of losing you. But more than that, I was scared of losing myself. I thought I could keep everything separate, but I was wrong. I lost myself in all of it. And I lost you, too. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I was selfish, Elias. I know that now. I took a step closer, my chest tight with the weight of her words. Selfish. It was a word I had used to describe her so many times in my mind, but hearing her say it, hearing the pain in her voice as she admitted it, made the anger inside me dissipate, if only for a moment. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Isolde, I said, the truth burning in my throat. What you did, it's not something I can just forget. She nodded, her eyes closing as if bracing herself for the words she knew were coming. I don't expect forgiveness, Elias. I don't deserve it. I just needed to see you one last time. To tell you that I'm sorry. And to tell you that I've always loved you. I still do. My heart twisted painfully in my chest. The words I had longed to hear for so long, the words that I had wanted so desperately to believe, were now nothing more than a bittersweet memory. I loved you too, I said, my voice breaking. I really did. But love isn't enough to make up for the things we've been through. I can't go back, Isolde. I can't live in the past anymore. She nodded again, tears falling freely down her face. I know. I understand. I'm sorry, Elias. I really am. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, the distance between us seeming as vast as the ocean, as if the love we once shared had been swallowed up by time and mistakes. Finally, I took a step back. Goodbye, Isolde. It was the hardest thing I had ever said. But it was the only thing left to say. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't reach out or beg me to stay. She just watched as I walked away, her figure growing smaller in the distance, until she was nothing more than a memory. And as I left that park, as I left her behind for good, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. Maybe it was the acceptance that I would never have the answers I sought. Maybe it was the realization that some love stories don't have a happy ending. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. Isolde and I had loved each other once, but love wasn't enough to save us. Not when trust had been shattered, not when the lies had become too many. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing, I would be okay. I would heal, slowly, piece by piece. But that chapter of my life, the one with her, the one with Isolde, was over. And I had to let go. For good.